before Europeans came to Cuba. The island had people living there for many years. These people were called the Taino. The Taino came from South America and arrived in the Caribbean islands around 400 BC. They traveled from the Orinoco Delta in Venezuela to many islands. They stopped at Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and other islands. The Taino were farmers and hunters. They grew yams, sweet potatoes, corn, and beans. They lived in villages and had leaders called caciques. These leaders were like chiefs who made decisions for their communities. The Taino built homes called bohayos. These were circular buildings made of wooden poles, straw, and palm leaves. Many families lived together in these homes. They also built larger homes called canis for their leaders. The Taino people were good at fishing and hunting. They made boats and traveled between islands. They had a peaceful way of life most of the time. The Taino believed in spirits and nature. They drew pictures on cave walls and made art from wood and stone. By the year 1000 A.D., the Taino culture was the strongest in Cuba. They numbered maybe 1 or 2 million people in all the Caribbean islands. The Taino had no knowledge that Europeans would soon come and change everything. The Taino people did not have weapons like guns or metal armor. Their world was about to change forever when the first ships arrived from Spain in 1492. On October 28, 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed near Cuba. Columbus was an Italian explorer sailing for Spain. He came on a journey across the Atlantic Ocean, looking for a route to Asia. When Columbus arrived in the Caribbean, he thought he had found Asia. He was wrong, but his arrival changed the world. Columbus landed on other islands first, but he soon came to Cuba. He claimed the island for Spain and named it Juana. Columbus saw the Taino people and wrote about them in his reports. He said they were friendly and kind. Columbus did not stay long in Cuba. He returned to Spain to tell the Spanish king and queen about his discoveries. In 1511, a Spanish leader named Diego Velázquez de Cuellar came to Cuba to start a real colony. He brought 300 soldiers, and they landed at Baracá on the eastern coast. The Spanish wanted to control Cuba and take its gold. They forced Taino people to work for them. A Taino leader named Otway tried to fight the Spanish, but the Spanish had better weapons with guns and metal. Otway and other leaders were caught and burned alive. Within 3 years, the Spanish conquered all of Cuba. The Taino people died from fighting, disease, and hard work. By around 1529, most of the Taino were gone. The Spanish then built towns and settlements. They founded Havana in 1519, which became a very important city for Spain. In the 1500s, the Spanish started growing sugarcane in Cuba. At first, they did not make much sugar, but after Haiti had a revolution in 1791, Cuban planters saw a big opportunity. They wanted to grow more sugar and become rich. They forced many African slaves to work on sugar plantations. Cuban sugar production grew very fast. In 1790, Cuba made 14,000 tons of sugar each year. By 1805, Cuba was making 34,000 tons per year. By 1895, Cuba made almost 1 million tons of sugar every year. Cuba became the world's leading sugar producer. The sugar industry was the most important business in Cuba. Sugar plantations covered large areas of the island. These plantations needed many workers. The Spanish brought hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans to Cuba. Slaves worked in terrible conditions under the hot sun. They got very little food and rest. Many slaves died from disease and hard work. The Spanish also brought machines to help make sugar faster. The machines came from England and other countries. Railroads were built to carry sugar to ships. By 1860, Cuba made almost 1/3 of all the world's sugar. Sugar made Cuba very rich, but only for the Spanish owners and white planters. Most Cuban people were poor. Enslaved people had no freedom and suffered greatly. The island's economy depended on sugar and slavery. This system created problems that would last for many years. In 1868, a sugar planter named Carlos Manuel de Céspedes decided to fight for Cuba's freedom from Spain. On October 10th, 1868, he made a speech called the Grito de Yara, which means a cry of Yara. In this speech, he freed his own slaves and asked them to join him in a war for independence. About 37 other planters joined him. This started the 10 Years' War, which lasted from 1868 to 1878. The Cuban Liberation Army fought against Spanish soldiers. Many freed slaves and poor people joined the fight. They used guerrilla warfare, attacking Spanish soldiers in surprise attacks, and then hiding in the forests and mountains. The war was very hard and violent. About 160,000 people died, including Cuban fighters and Spanish soldiers. The Spanish had better weapons and more soldiers, but the Cubans fought hard for their freedom. In 1878, the two sides signed a peace agreement called the Treaty of Zanjan. However, this agreement did not give Cuba full independence. Many Cubans were upset because they did not get everything they wanted. A general named Antonio Maceo continued to fight for a few more months, but he could not win. The 10 Years' War ended without Cuba becoming independent. However, the war was very important. It brought Cubans of different races together to fight for one cause. It created feelings of nationalism. It made many people believe that Cuba should be free from Spain. The war showed that Cubans really wanted independence, and the fight would continue later. After the 10 Years' War ended, many Cubans still wanted independence. In 1895, a new war began. José Martí was a famous poet and fighter for freedom. He organized a new revolution and fought against Spain again. On February 24th, 1895, the rebels started their attack, which was called the Grito de Bear. Leaders like Antonio Maceo and Maximo Gomez led Cuban soldiers. They fought in the eastern part of Cuba. The Spanish sent a general named Valeriano Weyler to stop the rebellion. Weyler used brutal methods. He forced people to move to towns and camps where many people got sick and died from hunger and disease. The war was destroying Cuba. The United States watched what was happening in Cuba and got angry at Spain. In February 1898, an American ship called the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor. About 266 American sailors died. Many Americans thought Spain caused the explosion. They shouted, "Remember the Maine," and wanted war. In April 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. This was called the Spanish-American War. American soldiers came to Cuba to help the rebels fight Spain. Together, American and Cuban forces defeated the Spanish army. Spain gave up and left Cuba in August 1898. The treaty that ended the war gave Spain's colonies to the United States. However, Spain did not keep Cuba. Cuba became independent, but the United States would have great influence there for many years. In 1902, Cuba officially became an independent republic. However, the United States still had strong control over Cuba. The Platt Amendment was a law that the United States created. It said the United States could intervene in Cuba if necessary. This agreement limited Cuba's freedom. Cuba had to accept this agreement to get independence. The Platt Amendment gave the United States the right to set up military bases in Cuba. The United States built a naval base at Guantanamo Bay, where American soldiers stayed. The first president of Cuba was Tomás Estrada Palma, who was a former soldier in the Independence War. Under American rules, Cuba had to obey many restrictions. The United States could interfere in Cuban government and business. Many American companies came to Cuba and controlled businesses, especially sugar companies. American investors became very rich from Cuban sugar. The Cuban economy depended on selling sugar to the United States. During these early years, the United States occupied Cuba again from 1906 to 1909. They sent soldiers to Cuba to keep order and protect American interests. Many Cubans did not like having the United States control their country. They felt they had just exchanged Spanish rule for American rule. Cubans wanted real independence and to make their own decisions. The American influence created anger and resentment among Cuban people. This unhappiness would grow stronger over the next 50 years. By the 1930s, Cubans wanted to get rid of American control and the Platt Amendment. During the 1930s, Cuba had serious problems. Many people were poor and had no jobs. Sugarcane workers suffered greatly. The Great Depression made everything worse because world sugar prices fell dramatically. In 1934, President Franklin Roosevelt of the United States ended the Platt Amendment. This gave Cuba back more freedom. However, Cuba's problems continued. Bad leaders ruled Cuba. Some leaders were corrupt and did not help poor people. In 1952, a general named Fulgencio Batista took power by force. Batista became a dictator. He ruled Cuba by force and did not allow people to vote fairly. Under Batista, rich people and American companies got richer, but poor Cubans got poorer. Many people had no jobs and no food. Batista's government was cruel and violent. Police arrested people who opposed him. Some people disappeared. Young Cubans, especially students, started to oppose Batista. One young man named Fidel Castro studied law and became a political activist. In 1953, Castro and his brother Raul tried to start a revolution. They attacked an army barracks called Moncada on July 26, 1953. The attack failed and many young men died. Castro and his brother were caught and put in prison. In 1955, Batista's government released them. Castro then went to Mexico to plan a new revolution. He met an Argentine revolutionary named Che Guevara. Together, they planned to return to Cuba and overthrow Batista. Their revolution was about to begin. In December 1956, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara sailed back to Cuba on a small boat called a Granma with about 82 other revolutionaries. They wanted to start a revolution against Batista. When they landed, Batista's army attacked them. Most of the group died or scattered, but about 19 survivors escaped to the Sierra Maestra Mountains in eastern Cuba. In these mountains, Castro and Guevara set up a base. They started a guerrilla war against Batista's army. They attacked army positions and then disappeared into the mountains. Local peasants supported them and gave them food and information. More young people joined Castro's army. His 26th of July movement grew stronger. They won many battles and inspired hope in ordinary Cubans. Batista's army tried to crush the revolution, but they could not catch Castro. Castro became very famous. American newspapers wrote about him. Many people around the world heard about his fight for freedom. As months passed, Castro's forces grew more powerful. They controlled more territory in eastern Cuba. In 1958, Batista sent his army to attack Castro, but Castro's guerrillas won the battles. Batista's army was tired and losing. Batista realized he could not win. On January 1st, 1959, Batista ran away and left Cuba. Castro's forces took control of the government. They drove into cities, celebrating their victory. Fidel Castro became the leader of Cuba. The revolution succeeded. Cuba had a new government that promised to help poor people and end corruption. However, this revolution would change Cuba in ways nobody expected. After the revolution, Fidel Castro wanted to change Cuba completely. He took control of land and businesses that belonged to rich people and American companies. He gave land to peasants who had nothing. He started free schools and free health care for poor people. Many Cubans loved these changes because they wanted to help poor people. However, the United States was very angry. American companies lost their businesses in Cuba. President Eisenhower ordered an economic embargo, which means the United States stopped buying Cuban sugar and stopped selling things to Cuba. Castro looked for help from the Soviet Union. In 1961, the United States tried to invade Cuba at a place called the Bay of Pigs. American-trained Cuban exiles landed on Cuba's coast, but Castro's army defeated them. This invasion made Castro look like a hero who defended Cuba. In 1962, tensions got very serious. The United States found out that the Soviet Union was putting nuclear missiles in Cuba. President John F. Kennedy was very worried about nuclear war. He ordered a naval blockade to stop Soviet ships from bringing missiles to Cuba. For 13 days, the world worried about nuclear war. Both the United States and Soviet Union had nuclear weapons pointed at each other. Finally, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles. The United States promised not to invade Cuba. This was called the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it was the closest the world came to nuclear war. After this crisis, Cuba became even more closely tied to the Soviet Union for safety and economic support. After the Cuban Revolution, the Soviet Union gave Castro's government money, oil, and other help. The Soviets bought Cuban sugar at high prices. Cuban people had jobs and basic needs were met, even though many things were hard to get. This system worked for about 30 years. Then in 1991, something terrible happened. The Soviet Union collapsed and broke apart into separate countries. This was a disaster for Cuba. Cuba lost its biggest trading partner and all the Soviet money and oil. Cuba's economy crashed. This time from 1991 to about 1995 was called the Special Period. Cubans had very little food, fuel, or medicine. Many people lost their jobs. Factories closed. Power went out regularly. The government had to ration food. Life became very difficult. To save money, Cubans rode bicycles instead of cars. They grew food in gardens. They tried to fix old things instead of buying new things. Many people became poor again. Some Cubans left the country on dangerous boats heading to America. Around 1995, things started to improve slowly. Venezuela became a new trading partner. Tourism brought money to Cuba. By 2006, Fidel Castro became sick and gave his power to his brother Raul Castro. Raul introduced small economic reforms to allow some private business. In recent years, Cuba has opened up a little bit. People can travel more. Some people can start small businesses. In 2015, the United States began normalizing relations with Cuba after many years of hostility. Today, Cuba still faces many challenges, but the country continues to change and adapt to a changing world.